When we think of popular blockbuster franchises, very few franchises break through internationally from outside the US, like the Godzilla franchise. Since its original 1954 release, Godzilla has had all manners of media representation, from its 36 films, including various Japanese and US reboots/remakes, anime, and an upcoming smackdown with America's kaiju, King Kong. There's a common consensus that the Godzilla films are primarily about monster fights, and that is in fact true. The majority of Godzilla films are in fact monster fights. Even the third film that was made in the Godzilla timeline, King Kong vs. Godzilla, a film that would not be replicated until, well, today. The day I upload this video, March 31st. However, I feel like something has been lost in translation. I love the monster fights, I really do, but there's just something missing out of all of these. I really do feel so. The original Godzilla, and not the one from 1956, was a film born from frustration and fear of further nuclear disasters. So much like my previous Criterion review of The Great Dictator, we're going to have to take a step back in history and learn a little bit of the context for why the original Godzilla worked so well as a film that both gravitated audiences in Japan and became an international blockbuster to begin with. And it's a mix of two things, really. One is the spectacle, and the other is the commentary. The threat of nuclear war was ever present in the Cold War. People learned about the ill-informed duck and cover technique, which, if you look at the history of that whole maneuver, it just would not save anyone's lives. It would just eviscerate them if you were in the center of the nuclear blast. And while in America we feared that the Russians would bomb us, Japan was living in the fallout. After the end of the Second World War, the US had occupied Japan from the years 1945 to 1952. During this time, Japanese residents were told that they had free speech, but just not enough to criticize the occupational force, or even to point out the factual reporting that was coming in from Hiroshima or Nagasaki, the two sites in which the two bombs were dropped to end World War II. The US occupation outright censored any mention of Hiroshima or Nagasaki in print or in any material, really. It wasn't until the United States left that people were allowed to find out the horrifying reality of living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki post-bomb. In fact, the first showing of what it was like in the fallen cities was the film Hiroshima, a film that showed the real reality of people who were living there. But this wouldn't be the last time that Japan would be faced with the result of nuclear weapons, or in fact, the results of nuclear power in of itself. While coming back from a trip to Indonesia, Tomoyuki Tanaka, the producer of Godzilla, was flying over the Bikini Atoll after the United States had bombed the area testing atomic weaponry. This was where the idea of Godzilla came from, a creature to serve as a symbol of the effects of nuclear power, of the nuclear war. What helped solidify the ties to atomic weaponry was a little fishing ship called the Lucky Dragon No. 5. This ship was exposed to radiation of the nuclear testing without them knowing. The fishers came back sick, and one of them died a few months later from the effects of the radiation. This event was actually implemented inside of the first minutes of the Godzilla film. When you watch the film today, it's clear that the historical parallel between the Lucky Dragon No. 5 and what happens at the beginning of the Godzilla is very purposeful, with Godzilla in of itself just sinking the ships outright, and any survivors of the attack were poisoned essentially from radiation or just killed. Part of the reason why I love this film is how the film itself was made. This was a film that used various methods of visual effects, and for the time and for the circumstances in which Japan was living in at that time during Reconstruction, you can sense that there was a little bit of a sort of scrappy nature of building this film together. The film utilized matte paintings and used them in a way that's kind of like compositing images behind different backgrounds. So for one image, you would have a foreground, and then for another image, you'd have the background, which would be the matte paintings. and then he could just stick something between them. It's kind of like a little puppet show if you really think about it. And in visual effect terms, for the 1950s, that was actually really well done. A lot of other sort of pulp sci-fi films of the era that had like giant monsters on islands, they never really had that sort of feeling that it was all there. And Godzilla, I feel, just makes the visual effects work in its favor. And yes, some of the visual effects don't look necessarily great on paper, but I think what helps to solidify the powerful nature of this film is that it's kind of shot like a documentary. It's shot in black and white, which really obscures a lot of the problem areas of the visual effects. Certainly you can notice some of the visual effects, of course, but this whole nature of putting it in black and white, the cinematography, really helps to solidify how real this made it look. Even though, yes, we know that there was an actor in a suit. Yes, we know that they did like matte paintings and scale models and all this other stuff to help bring the realism of the character to life. It's basically a film that works to its benefit because of the cinematography. Now, in speaking of the suit was built basically from scraps. Toho Studios
was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
The original suit was going to use materials that were not necessarily in huge supply. So what the effects people had to do was essentially mix plastic and latex together to create the suit materials, which unfortunately meant that it weighed 220 pounds after a 2-month build. 220 pounds, which made it really hard for the person inside the suit, Haru Nakajima, to even move certain body parts. In interviews, he said that the thing weighed so much and had little mobility that even if he were to turn his head inside, the head would not move much at all. And on top of this, at the time, Studio Toho did not actually have air conditioning. There was no way to get cooled air in there. And so with the heat of the lights as well as the weather outside the studio, it was 120 degrees inside of the suit, which, according to Nakajima, the sweat was literally raining on him during the movie, which didn't bother him that much because, according to him in an interview in 2011, he stated that because he was in the Navy and had to run so much, he got used to the sweat. So he wasn't bothered by being in that hot, heavy suit. And the suit itself had so many imperfections that later on, when they did the sequel to this movie, the two people that made the original suit came back and had more funding and had better materials to make it better. And over time, the Showa era had the usage of making the suit better. And going back to Haru Nakajima, on playing the character, he was told by the effects director to watch King Kong for references. He was also told to play the kaiju, you get inside the suit. But rather than acting, you move around as to camouflage the fact that you're inside. It's a mix of this philosophy and the special effects that helped bring this kaiju to life. He went on to play the character 11 more times, and he is even quoted in saying that this was his favorite character to play out of all the monsters he's ever played. Even though Godzilla moves slow compared to the contemporary films like Roland Emmerich's remake of the 90s being the fastest variation of Godzilla, what helps make this version of Godzilla a scary monster is the fact that danger isn't always quick. It usually builds slowly. And factually speaking, bigger objects tend to move slowly because the creature's mass and size. This is actually something that even Pacific Rim, many years later, managed to replicate digitally. Watching this film today, I wholeheartedly love this movie. As mentioned before, the visual effects really help make this film what it is. It's a terrifying tour de force and a really good monster flick. The music in this is just so iconic, to say the least. You know, you got the strings going da-da-da, 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 and then you have the drums emphasizing how big this event is. And this theme is such an iconic part of Godzilla's mythology that I can't help but wonder what Godzilla film would ever not use this score. It's such a iconic score. Unlike a majority of other Godzilla films, the original is almost played like a horror film, with bigger and more horrific events transpiring over time. Godzilla looms like the threat of nuclear annihilation. It is a film that serves as a retort of the advancement of powerful weapons, and this commentary comes in the form of a crucial character, Dr. Serizawa. In the original film, and not the Warner Bros. Reboot in 2014, Dr. Serizawa serves to be a kind of Oppenheimer in this story, where J. Robert Oppenheimer was terrified of the implications of his work on the hydrogen bombs that were dropped on Japan. Dr. Serizawa, knowing how bad atomic weapons are, doesn't want his technology to be used for the same, if not more powerful, evil. In the film, he creates an oxygen destroyer, a bomb that sucks oxygen out of water. It kills anything that's in the water in a certain radius it's placed in. In many ways, this is an equal, if not more dangerous, piece of technology. He is apprehensive because he never wanted it to be weaponized, and after hearing the cries of citizens to save them from Godzilla, he decides to use the bomb on the creature only after destroying the research papers that he used to make the oxygen destroyer. And to cement this full erasure of how to make this device, he ends up sacrificing his life to defeat Godzilla and take the knowledge to his grave. This serves a point that in the efforts of war, there is always going to be a weapon bigger than the current weapon of war. Weapons that are far more deadly. And in a way, it is anti-proliferation. It's weapon building, as it were. It's basically an anti-war movie. Godzilla, even though he is just a big monster in this film that destroys stuff, isn't necessarily a villain in this. Yes, he destroyed Tokyo and parts of Japan in his rampage. He was just rampaging because people destroyed his home as a result of the nuclear weapons testing. Even in the film, they explain that his home is destroyed from the bombs. Godzilla, in of itself, is the result of karma. And by that end, when he is killed, it's understandable that the citizens are in high spirits after killing Godzilla, but at what cost? It killed a lot of fish and a fellow human being, and it also ended up killing a creature whose home was destroyed. The ending line of this film from Professor Tanabe feels like a warning against future nuclear testing. Even though this Godzilla is dead, as long as there are more tests, you could be certain that there will be a possibility for more monsters to rise up like the one in this film. At the time in 1954, movies would be lucky to get a max of 2 million people to go see them in Japan. But when Godzilla was released, around 9.8 million people went out to go see it, proving that this film had a huge connection with Japanese audiences. It was a horror film that was very timely, that got to the anxiety of nuclear war and nuclear weapons. People were actually terrified of the Tokyo scene because of the damage Godzilla did to it. Early generations would look at the scene and say it looks like a silly fantasy, but to those who had experienced the fact that their country was bombed by nuclear weapons, they could see something like this happening.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
The film was so influential, in fact, that in 1956, America would see it as the remade Godzilla, King of the Monsters, a film that I don't think works nearly as well as the original. The thing to know about this film is that it is largely the same film, but with the addition of English dubs and 10 extra minutes of the American journalist subplot. The reason why this doesn't work is that the edits are very, very jarring. Switching between the 54 film and the 56 editions feels like night and day almost at times. Rather than telling a story directly from the Japanese point of view, because of these sections, the film divorces the focus from Japan to how America views the incident, which gets rid of a lot of the original narrative pace and focus of the original film. Now, this wouldn't be the last time that America would use Japanese footage for American shows. Most notably, shows like Saban's Power Rangers franchise uses footage from various Super Sentai shows and mixes them with footage shot in America. And I would argue that the edits are better in that show than what King of the Monsters tries to accomplish. And since then, Godzilla went from a creature brought about by nuclear weapons to being a sort of superhero protecting the world by fighting King Kong and King Ghidorah. While I will always love the crossovers and fights between Godzilla and other kaiju, the original Godzilla, while not the most perfect film in the world, is a film that was made out of passion and protest against a technology that could destroy the world. It's a film that pleads for peace in the end. Seeing how the threat of nuclear war has never really went away, even with our current situation with North Korea and China, as it were, the resurrection or reappearance of Godzilla isn't necessarily new. Where there's nuclear weapons and nuclear power, Godzilla will always come next. Godzilla is an amazingly crafted monster flick from the 50s, with a bit more to say than any contemporary blockbuster film. It's a film that balances huge spectacle with critical social commentary. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for watching this edition of the Criterion Corner, and I hope you all have a very nice day, and if you excuse me, I'm going to go watch some monster fights between Godzilla and King Kong. I'll see you then. Peace.